The inside of the carriage smelled of rosewater and dust. Charlotte Beaumont sat stiffly between trunks of linen and lace, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap as the wheels groaned beneath them. Outside, pine trees blurred past, golden leaves, spinning in the wind. Somewhere far behind her was New York lace curtains, marble steps. Tea at 4. Somewhere ahead, California's stranger's estate and a marriage forged by men in polished boots and high collars, who'd never once asked her what she wanted. I still don't see why I must marry him, she muttered under her breath. Because your father promised it, the older woman beside her replied curtly. And because you are no longer a child, Charlotte. From the front of the carriage, the driver's voice cut through the wind. River crossing ahead. Hold tight. The coach slowed as the wheels dipped into the shallows. The riverbed was muddy, swollen from early autumn rains. The horses whinnied, ears twitching. Hooves uncertain, then a howl pierced the air. Another followed, closer, deeper. From the trees on the far bank, a blur of gray surged forward. Wolves, dozens of them snarling, fangs bared, racing straight toward them. The horses reared. One slipped. A wheel sank into the muck. The entire carriage jolted sideways. Charlotte screamed, "Dear God!" The coach rocked, groaned. Then with a terrible crack, it splintered and tipped. Charlotte was flung sideways. Her back slammed against the wooden panel. And then water. Cold, choking, merciless. She went under before she could scream. Her gowns tangled around her legs. A trunk crashed into her ribs. She kicked, flailed, clawed upward. Her head broke the surface once, just once, before the current dragged her farther downstream. Branches scraped her arms, tore at her sleeves. Her bonnet vanished. She gasped, choking, reaching for something, anything. Then darkness. She woke coughing. Mud coated her tongue. Her hands clutched wet earth. Behind her, the river roared. She tried to move. Pain stabbed through her hip, sharp and unforgiving. Her dress clung to her skin like a second body, soaked and heavy. Every inch of her ached. A low growl echoed through the trees. She froze. 3. Wolves emerged slowly from the brush, eyes glowing yellow, heads low, jaws twitching. They spread out, circling. Charlotte crawled backward. Her arms collapsed beneath her. She could barely whisper, "Help me." The first wolf crept closer. A sharp whistle, thunk. An arrow buried itself in the dirt inches from the wolf's paw. It snarled, recoiled. Another whistle, another arrow. The pack halted. Then silence. The wolves turned and disappeared into the trees. Charlotte blinked, tears streaking down her dirt-smeared cheeks. From the shadows, a tall figure emerged, leather clothes, long black hair, a bow still in his hand. His face was unreadable, calm, not cruel, but not kind. She gasped, crawling backward again. Please don't hurt me." He didn't move. He only looked at her. Then slowly, he knelt. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was deep, accented, foreign but careful. She stared at him, throat raw, unable to answer. "I won't harm you," he said gently. She flinched as he reached into a pouch and pulled out a blanket. He draped it over her shoulders without touching her skin. Then, without another word, he lifted her. She tried to struggle, but her body betrayed her. Weak, trembling, she sank into his arms. He carried her through the woods, up a narrow, hidden trail that curved along the side of a hill. They passed trees tall as spires, leaves whispering secrets overhead. Finally, they reached a small cabin nestled into the slope, smoke curling from its chimney like breath in cold air. Inside, the air was warm and dim. A fire burned low. Animal hides lined the walls. He laid her gently on a thick blanket beside the hearth, then fetched a bowl of water and a cloth. "Who are you?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He dipped the cloth in water and pressed it gently to her forehead. "Rest," he said. Then he sat a few feet away, silent, watching the flames. And for the first time since the rivers swallowed her world, Charlotte breathed without screaming. Morning light crept through the cracks in the cabin, soft and golden. Charlotte stirred beneath a heavy wool blanket, her limbs aching with every breath. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the scent of pine and smoke and something earthy roots perhaps brought it all back. She sat up slowly, wincing at the sharp pain in her hip. Her dress had been dried and folded beside her. She now wore a simple linen shift, unfamiliar but clean. A bowl of water sat nearby, along with a tin cup and a piece of coarse bread. He was there, sitting by the hearth, turning something in a small clay bowl with a carved wooden pestle. He looked up. "You wake?" She stared, heart thudding. Where am I?" "Safe," he said. "Mountain." "Who are you?" He crossed the room, placing the bowl near her. "Drink," he said. "Helps pain." She looked into the dark liquid. "What is it?" "Root. No poison," he added, his voice dry, almost amused. She hesitated, then took a sip. "Bitter, but not unpleasant. You saved me." He nodded once. "Why?" "You were drowning. Wolves were hungry. No good to leave." Still, she looked at him closely. "You don't even know me." He knelt beside her, not too close. His eyes were dark, steady. "Don't need to." He stood again, hung a satchel on the wall. She noticed something, his movements, silent, smooth. He didn't stomp or fidget like the men she knew. Every step was part of the ground itself. He rolled out a blanket near the door and lay down with his back to her. "You're not going to question me?" she asked softly. "Not going to ask why I was in the river?" "No," he replied. "You rest. Tomorrow. You walk." There was no sarcasm in his voice, just truth. She lay back, puzzled. No one had ever told her to rest without strings. Not her governess, not her father, not even the doctor when she had fever as a child. Later, as the fire dimmed and the wind whispered through the cabin walls, she turned slightly. "What's your name?" He didn't move. Then, from the dark, "Etza." She repeated it, quietly. "What does it mean, Falcon?" She smiled faintly. "I like that. Double quotes silence. She turned on her side, hugging the blanket to her chest. The fire crackled outside. A coyote howled deep in the canyon, and inside, for the first time in days, Charlotte felt something unfamiliar, not comfort, not peace, but a quiet, solemn safety. She didn't understand it. She didn't trust it, but it was enough. The days passed without names. Charlotte stopped counting them. Time moved differently here, not by clocks, but by the scent of smoke, the hush of snowmelt, the slow rhythm of survival. Each morning, Etza brought her fresh water, checked her bandaged hip. Each evening, he returned with rabbits or trout or bundles of roots. He spoke little, but his silence wasn't cold. It made space for breath, for healing. Charlotte moved slowly at first. Her hip throbbed, then dulled. One morning, she walked to the door with the help of a carved stick Etza had shaped for her. He watched from a distance, said nothing, but nodded once when she reached the threshold. "I made it," she said softly. He didn't smile, not fully, but something softened in his expression. By week's end, she was stirring stew over the fire while Etza cleaned fish outside. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. When she pointed at the salt, he handed it. When she frowned at the bland taste, he nodded and passed her thyme. Their eyes had become a language. One afternoon, she asked, "Why do you live alone?" Etza didn't answer at first. He was sharpening a bone knife by the fire. His hands were steady. "Then, my people are scattered, some taken, some killed, some lost to white world." He paused. "When I was boy, I was taken to soldiers. 3 moons I stayed in cage." Charlotte froze. She looked down at her hands. What did they want?" she asked gently. "Names, numbers, things I didn't know. They beat me when I said nothing." Her throat tightened. "How old were you?" 13. She reached across the space between them, not to touch, just to leave her hand open on the floor. "I'm sorry." He glanced at her hand, then her eyes. "I didn't die, so I live." She nodded slowly. That night, beside the fire, she spoke again. "My father arranged my marriage to a man in California. I've never met him. All I know is he's powerful, older. He wants a wife to look pretty and keep quiet." Etza said nothing. He added a log to the fire, watching it flare. "I was in that carriage because I was doing what was expected," she whispered. "But I never wanted it." Still, he said nothing. "I don't even know who I am anymore." Etza stirred the embers. "Maybe you find out here." She looked at him, really looked, and nodded. The next morning, her skin burned to warm. By midday, she shivered beneath the blanket, her face flushed, breath shallow. Atsa. She called weakly. He moved quickly, crushing roots, boiling herbs, soaking cloths. He sat beside her, wiping her forehead, pressing water to her lips. Mama, Mama, please don't go, she cried in her fever. He stayed with her, didn't speak, didn't leave. He watched over her like a guardian of ghosts. On the second night, the fever broke. Charlotte stirred, dazed. The first thing she saw was Atsa, sitting on the floor, back to the wall, eyes half closed in exhaustion. You stayed, she whispered. He opened his eyes fully. You are strong. I didn't feel strong. You survived. She blinked up at the ceiling. Thank you. He stood slowly, placed a cup of broth beside her. She took it, hands trembling. He didn't speak. He just watched her, quiet, steady. That night, as she drifted into sleep, one thing became clear. She wasn't alone anymore. The morning was colder than before. A pale blue sky stretched above, and frost clung to the leaves like a memory. Wrapped in the wool blanket, Charlotte stood at the clearing's edge, watching Atsa strap his bow across his back. Where are you going? South Ridge. Saw smoke. Yesterday. Could be old. I look. She hesitated. You think it's them? The ones who attacked the carriage. He looked toward the trees. Maybe nothing. Then his eyes returned to hers. Stay here. Fire low. Don't answer sound unless it is me. She nodded. Evening came. His steps returned heavier than before. He didn't speak. His eyes looked far away. Charlotte stepped forward. Did you find something? From his pouch, he pulled a piece of embroidered fabric, a handkerchief, golden thread twined in the letters CB. She pressed her fingers to her lips, eyes wide. That was in my trunk. They're all gone. She whispered. He nodded. No bodies. He shook his head. Just pieces. Clothes, books, trunks, left to rot. Charlotte turned away, arms wrapped around herself. Her breath trembled. I thought maybe someone would come. My father, my fiancé, a search party. Even as she said it, she knew how foolish it sounded. How far away those names felt now. No one is looking for me, she murmured. No, Atsa said simply. The words should have shattered her, but they didn't. They clarified her. She knelt beside the fire, eyes on the flames. Teach me. Atsa frowned. Teach what? To survive. He tilted his head. You are surviving. I want to do more than survive, she said, voice steady. Now, I want to know what to do when the fire goes out, when you don't come back, when I'm alone again. Atsa studied her. She didn't flinch. Without a word, he stepped into the cabin. When he returned, he held something wrapped in dark cloth. He unwrapped it slowly and offered it to her. A knife, not large, but sharp, balanced, the handle wrapped in worn hide. This is not for killing, he said. This is for cutting, carving, making. Only use it to defend, never for anger. She took it. The leather was warm, heavy, real. I understand, she said. Their eyes met. Gone was the frightened girl from the riverbank. What stared back now was someone forged from the fire. Someone who had lost everything and chosen to rise. That night, Charlotte did not cry. She cleaned the knife with steady care, polishing its edge with a strip of cloth before laying it by her side. The fire crackled low beside her, casting flickering shadows on the ceiling of wooden beams and smoky twilight. Charlotte stared upward, not waiting for rescue anymore. That part of her, the helpless girl hoping someone might come, was gone. She was becoming her own rescue. The days that followed were quieter, but never empty. There was rhythm now, a shape to time. At dawn, before the fire was hot, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and followed Atsa into the tall grass and thick pines. He always walked ahead, never beside her, never behind, just a few paces forward, pausing only long enough to let her catch up. This one, he said one morning, gesturing toward a low bush with clusters of small purple berries, good for cough. She knelt beside it, brushing her fingers lightly over the leaves. What do you call it? He tapped his chest, then said the word slowly. Nili. She repeated it carefully, shaping the unfamiliar syllables on her tongue. Nili. He nodded once. Other mornings he showed her how to build a fire from damp bark, how to stack stones to hold warmth through cold nights, how to notch branches to trap small animals. Her hands blistered, her fingers fumbled, but she never stopped. Trying. At night, they sat by the fire, bowls of rabbit stew in their laps. The silence between them no longer awkward. It had become something steady, like the hush of wind threading through pine needles. "You speak more than I thought you would," she said one evening, her voice teasing, a soft smile playing at her lips. Atza raised an eyebrow, a glint of quiet humor in his eyes. "You listen more than most people I've met." She laughed short, warm, unguarded. "I suppose we're both surprises." He stirred the fire, the orange glow dancing across his face. "You teach me your words," he said. "I teach you mine." She nodded, and each night after that, they traded sounds. She pointed to her hair. "Hair." He touched a strand. "Tillage." She smiled and repeated it. He corrected her gently, shaping the sounds with patience. As they built this vocabulary, something deeper formed between them, not just a bridge of language, but of trust. One afternoon, they sat side by side skinning a rabbit. Charlotte's voice came soft, uncertain. "Do you ever miss your tribe?" Atza paused. "Yes, but they do not miss me." She looked over at him, heart tightening. "Why not?" He wiped his knife on a cloth. "After soldiers took me, I was changed. My people said the white men poisoned my soul. They feared me, feared what I'd seen." Her voice dropped. "And the soldiers, they called me savage, less than a man." She shook her head slowly, sadness pooling in her chest. "So, you belonged nowhere." He said nothing. They sat in silence, fire popping quietly beside them. Then she reached out and placed her hand gently on his arm, not to hold, just to let it rest. "You do now." Atza didn't pull away, but he didn't speak either. That night, after dinner, they sat on the log bench outside the cabin. The stars shimmered like frost above them. Charlotte's voice, when it came, was quiet but unwavering. "When I was 13, she said, my father told me I would marry for the family's benefit. That love was childish. That duty was what made a woman valuable." Atza listened, gaze fixed on the fire. "I was promised to a man I'd never met, a man who wanted a wife like a painting, quiet, beautiful, still." Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. I smiled. I obeyed. I wore the right dress. I spoke the right words, but I couldn't breathe. Not really. A long breath passed between them. Then she looked at him, direct, open. "But here," she said, her voice a thread of truth. "Now I breathe for myself, for the first time." Atza's eyes softened. He looked at her not as someone fragile, not as someone to protect, but as someone rising, someone who had begun to claim her voice, her place, her breath. They didn't touch. They didn't speak again that night, but they sat side by side until the fire burned down to embers, watching stars in shared silence, the kind that only grows between two people no longer strangers, but not yet lovers. Something deeper was taking root between them, not fast, not loud, but real. By now, the sound of Atza's footsteps on damp pine needles was as familiar to Charlotte as her own breath. She no longer waited in the cabin for him. Instead, she rose before dawn and followed, always behind, never beside. He didn't slow for her. She didn't need him to. The forest had its rhythm, and she had learned to hear it. Each morning brought a lesson: how to sharpen her knife on river stones, how to tell a squirrel's alarm call from the silent swoop of a hawk, how to spot fever root versus poison vine. "Each plant has a story," Atza said. "If you can't read it, it kills you." She watched how he moved, how he stepped softer on moss than gravel, how his eyes searched the sky more than the ground. One day he stopped and pointed at a tree where bark peeled in long, ragged strips. "You say?" he asked. She leaned in, eyes tracing the grooves. "Claw marks. Bare?" He nodded. 2 days old. "Going east." Charlotte touched the gouges lightly. "How do you know where it went?" He smiled faintly. "I asked it." She laughed, and for the first time, it didn't sound out of place. It sounded like it belonged here. In the afternoons, they returned to the clearing. Charlotte practiced her lessons, building fires from dry needles and river stone, carving notches into trees to mark safe paths, soaking herbs for poultices. Atza rarely praised, but he watched. He always watched. At night, the silence between them pulsed with quiet meaning. When he handed her a knife, their fingers brushed, deliberate, lingering, When she passed him a bowl of stew, her hand paused, a moment longer than necessary. Still, they didn't speak of it. Until one night, the wind had turned cold, the fire cracked softly. Charlotte stirred the embers with a stick, watching sparks lift into the dark. "Have you ever been in love?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Atza didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, then slowly turned to her. "When you love someone," he said, "you do not run when you are afraid. You stay." Her breath caught in her chest. She turned to face him fully. "I think I'm in love," she whispered. Atza blinked, then just as softly replied, "I think I am too." No one moved. The fire flared, then settled. They didn't touch. They didn't smile. But something passed between them, not just words, but a vow. In that moment, they became something more than two survivors. They became each other's home. And though no hands were held, no lips met, Charlotte felt something ignite in her chest, not the wild heat of sudden passion, but a deep, steady warmth, something earned, something real, a slow-burning fire that would not be snuffed by fear, silence, or time. But the wind had shifted. It carried a different scent now: smoke, iron, sweat. Atza knelt by the stream bed just after sunrise. The earth was damp from last night's rain. His fingers traced fresh indentations in the mud. Bootprints, deep and narrow, not moccasins, not Apache. 3 men, he murmured, heavy, armed. He followed the trail a few feet further and found hoof prints beside them. Horses, not wild. The tracks pointed northwest toward the edge of the forest, toward the hidden cabin. When he returned, Charlotte was kneeling in the garden, gently pressing a mint sprig into the earth. Her braid hung loose over one shoulder. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows. She looked like someone who had always belonged here. He stopped at the edge of the clearing. She saw his face and stood instantly. "What is it?" Someone was near. "The stream," he said. "Men, white, not trappers." Her breath hitched. "How many?" "3, on horses. Heavy boots, guns." She stepped closer, her voice low. "What do we do?" Atza glanced toward the hills. "I will wait. Watch. If they come near." He didn't finish. He turned back to her. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. "If I do not return before night," he said, "you take food and water. Go to the river. Follow it downstream. Do not stop. Do not turn back." Charlotte's jaw tightened. "No, I won't." "You will," he said, firm. "This is not bravery. This is survival." She swallowed hard, then nodded. That afternoon, the forest held its breath. Even the birds were silent. Charlotte stayed inside the cabin, crouched low, a knife clutched tightly in her hand. Every rustle outside made her blood pound in her ears. Somewhere in the brush, Atza waited, hidden, still, breath slow and deliberate, a bow in his hand. They came just as the sun dipped low. 3 men on horseback, dirty coats, stubbled jaws, guns across their backs. One wore a red bandana, another chewed a toothpick. The third had eyes that twitched too fast, like a rat. "Looks like someone lives here," said the man with the toothpick. They dismounted. Atza stepped from behind a tree, silent as a ghost. "Turn around," he said. The men paused. "Well, hell," said the bandana man with a smirk. "Look what we got. Here, a redskin in the woods." "We just want a fire," said the third, "and maybe a piece of meat. Ain't a skin for much." "There's nothing for you here," Atza said, calm and cold. Toothpick man stepped forward. "Don't be rude now. We're just travelers. You got shelter. We could pay." "No." Toothpick grinned wider. "You gonna make us leave?" He took another step. The string of Atza's bow groaned as it tightened. Then dash whistled. Thunk. An arrow slammed into the dirt an inch from the man's boot. He froze. Silence spread like oil through the clearing. "Jesus Christ," one of them muttered. The grin vanished. The 3 men looked at one another. Then slowly, hands lifted in the still air. They stepped back. Toothpick spat into the dust. "Ain't worth it," he muttered. Bandana sneered. "Savages got teeth." They mounted up. As they turned their horses, one of them shouted over his shoulder, "You'll regret this." "Red man, we don't forget." Their voices vanished into the trees like smoke. For a long, brittle moment, the clearing stood still. Then the cabin door flung open. "Atza," Charlotte called out, her voice breaking as she ran. "Are you hurt?" He turned to her. No, but she didn't stop. Her eyes scanned him in a panic. His arms, his chest, the still air around him. "I thought they shot. I didn't let them," he said quietly. Her hands trembled. He looked down at her, then at the arrow quivering in the dirt where it had landed, sharp and final. She followed his gaze, her voice a whisper. "You could have killed him. I've killed before." He replied, his voice low, worn with memory. "But not today." Her throat tightened. "Why not?" He hesitated. Then, softly, "Because someone needs me alive." She stared at him, tears burning in her eyes. He had every reason to let anger guide his hands, every wound, every ghost, but he had chosen restraint, not because he was weak, but because something deeper held him steady. Love. And for the first time, she saw what it cost him to be gentle, how fiercely he guarded that choice. Or from that day on, Charlotte no longer kept her distance. She followed Atza not just through the forest but through every task, every quiet burden he carried. She didn't hesitate when he passed her a tool or pointed toward a line of trees that needed clearing. She patched the cabin's roof with him, braced logs against storm winds, mended the crooked fence to keep the wild pigs from digging up the roots. Atza didn't comment on her changes, but she saw it, in the way he gave her the better knife, in the way he stepped aside so she could lead the trail, in the way he let her decisions stand. She had learned the voice of the land. She knew when a bird's cry meant danger and when it was merely gossip. Her fingers could hear the dry snap of good firewood. She tied her snares with confidence now. She no longer asked, "What should I do?" She simply did it. One morning, Atza watched her from the tree line. Charlotte knelt beside a deer track in the soft earth. Without a word, she pointed. 3 hours old, she said, heading north. Probably male. Atza nodded. She smiled. That evening, they sat by the stream, eating roasted fish wrapped in broad leaves. The air was cool, laced with pine and the hush of twilight. Firelight flickered over their faces. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Then Charlotte leaned sideways, resting her head on his shoulder. He didn't move. Her voice was soft against the hush of the flowing water. "Do you ever think about losing me?" Atza didn't answer at first. His body remained still beneath her, but his hand tightened slightly around the stick he held. "Yes," he said finally, "but not the way you think." She looked up at him. "I do not fear wolves," he continued, "or rivers, or fire. I fear you leaving, not by death, by choice." Her eyes shone, but she didn't cry. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He turned just enough to meet her gaze. "But your world, it will come. They always come." She shook her head. "I don't belong to that world anymore." He studied her face, searching for the shadow of doubt, but there was none. She took a breath, then slowly reached for his hand. Her fingers slid into his firm, sure, no trembling, no hesitation. He looked down at their joined hands, at how hers fit within his. Something deep in his chest shifted, like earth unfreezing after a long winter. He closed his fingers around hers tightly, like a man who had lost too much and was finally daring to hold something again. They sat like that for a long time, two quiet souls on the edge of a fire, surrounded by trees, sky, and silence. They did not kiss. They made no promises. But in that stillness, they crossed something no map could ever show. She was no longer the girl who had been rescued, and he was no longer the man who only knew how to live alone. Together, they had found a language beyond words, made of shared glances, long silences, and a single hand held without fear. And in that quiet wilderness, love became real. The wind was gentle the next morning, carrying the scent of cedar and the crisp tang of autumn. Charlotte stood at the edge of a rocky outcrop above the tree line. Her eyes narrowed against the sun. From here, she could see far across the thinning gold of the valley, the tops of distant evergreens swaying below. And there, just beyond the trees, a glint of metal. Movement. 5 riders emerged along the low ridge, no rifles slung, no army uniforms, just riding coats, clean boots, upright posture, Easterners. She heard a voice call her name, Charlotte. The sound sliced through her like wire. Her breath caught. It was a voice she knew, her cousin maybe, or one of the house servants who had traveled with the carriage. Familiar from another life. But she didn't run. She didn't crouch or cry. She stepped behind a stone and watched. Still. Steady. They scanned the forest below, unsure. They lingered, then turned their horses, and slowly the trees swallowed them whole. She stayed frozen long after they were gone. When she returned to the cabin, Atza was crouched by the hearth, coaxing life from a bed of embers. His back was to her, but she knew he had heard her return. He looked up. Their eyes met. He didn't ask. She sat beside him, staring into the fire. I saw them, she said, voice barely more than a breath. They were calling my name. Still, he didn't ask what she had done. She stared at the flames. Her voice firm now. I didn't answer. He said nothing. She placed a hand over her chest. I've lost everything I was supposed to be, she said. A daughter, a wife, a lady. Then she turned to him, and in losing it, I found this. I found you. Atza rose slowly and reached into the worn pouch tied at his side. He pulled out a strip of hand-tooled leather, dark and soft, with a smooth blue stone at its center shaped like a drop of river water, polished by time. He held it out to her. This is not a white woman's ring, he said. But if you wear it, it means you stay. You choose this. You choose me. Charlotte's throat tightened. Her eyes filled. She held out her hand. His fingers were steady as he tied the band around her wrist, knotting it twice. Then, in one quiet motion, he pulled her into his arms. You are my family now, he said. His voice was deep, sure, unshaking. She looked up at him and kissed him, not a question, not timid. A true kiss, fierce, full, free. That afternoon, they climbed to the highest point of the ridge, where the sky opened wide and the valley stretched like a breath held too long. There, surrounded by wind and sky, they spoke vows in the language they had taught each other, Apache and English. Syllables imperfect but true. Atza pressed his palm to her chest. You live in my fire. Charlotte touched his forehead. You walk in my sky. Together they carved into the old cedar behind the cabin the shape of a soaring eagle. Beneath it, the letter C**. No minister, no gown, no crowd. Just two hearts that had wandered far and finally found home. That night, beneath a sky of stars, Charlotte lay beside the fire with her head on Atza's chest. The wind whispered gently through the pines. He placed a hand on her belly. This home, he murmured, won't hold just two for long. Charlotte smiled. Tears glimmered at the corners of her eyes. She leaned her forehead to his, her voice soft and warm. We are each other's now, from river to forest, to forever. If Charlotte and Atza's story stirred something deep in you, if you felt the breath of the forest, the weight of silence, and the quiet power of a love that crossed every boundary, then let us know by liking this video, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and subscribing to Wild West Love Stories. Here, we tell stories that don't just sound beautiful, they endure. Love born in fire, in blood, and in the bravest act of all, choosing to stay. We'll see you on the next ride, out here in the Old West, where hearts don't have to shout, they just have to believe.